Welcome back to the Dragon Heads podcast. I'm your co-host Thorn Rain. With me, as always, our gracious host, Mr. Joe. How are you this evening, sir? Afternoon. We're a little early today.
Well,
Different
we
quarter.
had a challenging schedule, and a lot of news came out. A lot
Yes.
of stuff to talk about today. So let's get to it, man.
Yep. We'll roll right down into this bit of news here. So why don't you take us away on the big news of the weekend?
Well, the big news of the weekend is there's three the three books that are being released through the rest of this year, 2021. Um, the three books that are being released by Wizards of the Coast are Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Fizbans Treasury of Dragons, and Strixhaven uh, Curriculum of Chaos. So, what do you want to talk about first? Do you want to go in chronological order when they're coming out?
Um, which one is it that's coming out first?
I think Witchlight.
Witchlight. Yeah, we can get into the Witchlight.
Well, the I'm excited about Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and I'm excited for several reasons. But first and foremost, it feels very it feels kind of Wizard of Oz, because it's it's basically drop this adventure anywhere in your world. Suddenly, there's mist rolling through the room. There's lights, and next thing you know, people are inviting you to this carnival, and it's it's one half introduction to the Feywild. It's the first official D&D adventure set in the Feywild, and the it gives a couple new character options, couple new race options. Um, and one of the big things that the adventure really focuses on is that all the encounters in the adventure have some sort of non-combat option. They don't go into specifics about it, but even Chris Perkins himself said um, it's sometimes better to manage your way through the carnival with a smile rather than a sword, and that says worlds to me. There's so many times that players just automatically resort to, well, we pull our swords out and stab them. This is one of those ones where I think having a group that's a little bit more role play in heavy, or you can build characters that lean into that role play,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it'll be a lot of fun, a lot of interesting things, and it is an adventure. It is like any of the other adventures. I mean, it has this other cool stuff that's with it, but ultimately, it's an adventure from I believe it's 1 to 8 levels, 1 to 8, and it's it looks like it is going to be so much fun. There's going to be so many interesting interesting carnival carnival things happening in the carnival, the games, way to I just see fairies pulling pranks. I see satyrs doing juggling and music and the whole 9 yards. And then the new rabbit folk, they're called Harrigan, which I'm never gonna remember that. I'm
Yeah,
always gonna call them rabbit folk.
Rabbit Folk. This is easier.
Yeah, and it's well, it's just like the tabaxi. It's like you're calling them cat folk for so long. Well, eventually you get used to calling them tabaxi. It'll be a while for them to catch on, but the Haragon are they're interesting. They present a lot of role play opportunities. Um, and then the other playable race is the fairies. And the only thing that I'm a little disappointed about with the fairies, um, I understand whenever they, because of rules and way things work out, the behemoth sort of races, your Goliaths, your Minotaurs, your uh orcs, these things that are 8 foot tall, and then they're still medium creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of a rules thing, because if they're technically large creatures, all of a sudden they're able to grapple giants, essentially, which are huge creatures, because you're able to grapple one size bigger. But one of the things I at least that in the Unearthed Arcana, they weren't willing to make the fairies tiny, because you have your small races like gnomes, goblins, halflings. These fairies are considered small, and I always picture these fairies as like 12 inches tall, a foot tall, versus a halfling which is like 3 foot tall.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that
And
would make
I
sense.
right, and it's one of those things. I always view them as like a tiny race, and I don't know how much that there is their rules thing about having super small races. I don't know, but it's really interesting. It's a lot of really cool stuff that this book seems to contain, and it's just it's coming out quick, and it's going to be a lot of fun to explore, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play through.
Oh yeah, and then the on September 21st, they're also doing a a companion set where you get a whole set of dice. I believe yeah, 11 dice, 2d20s, 1d12, 2d10s, 1d8, 4d6s and a d4. Um the box turns into 2 dice trays. Uh, full fold out map of the carnival, which I think that's pretty awesome. I love everything like clown and carnival. So like being able to play through a carnival and like role play like ring toss is going to be hilarious. You want to talk about having some seriously fun role play moments? Role play a carnival. It's awesome. And then it's looking like it's got a price point of like $27, so not too bad. Getting all of the dice and the map and everything like that. I I'm pretty interested in it. But
Is that something separate from the book itself, or is
yeah,
that
this is separate from the book. This is just dice a collector's case, like I said, that turns into dice trays, the map, and then it's got like double-sided reference cards and illustrations for characters, creatures, games, and other features of the Witchlight Carnival. So it sounds like there it's going to be extremely detailed, and instead of having to open the book to talk about maybe the one of the games or one of the people that are running one of the shows, you have this card that'll have all of the information and stats on it with a nice little illustration on it.
and that's the other thing I was going to say, is that the illustrations and the artwork that has been shown with the Witchlight Carnival, and um, shown with the book, and everything looks gorgeous,
Yep.
absolutely gorgeous. It is one of those things that they are truly doing. I don't want to say everything, but they are doing everything they can to make it look really really good.
Yep.
And I'll be damned that every time that they're putting this out there, and really just everything is so detailed. It has that fey essence to it, and everything from the lighting to the drawings to everything looks absolutely gorgeous.
Yep. So now let's talk about half of the namesake of the game that we're talking about. We're talking about dragons here. It's Friday during D&D Live. It was announced Fizbans Treasury of Dragons, which I'm hearing is basically the 3.5 or the 5th edition version of the 3.5 Draconomicon, I believe is how I'm pronouncing it correctly. They were referencing it uh in the D&D Live quite a bit. I believe the original author of that was part of this. is what I
He
was
was
hearing.
one of the big, yeah, he was one of the guys that was had a lot of input, from what I understand, into this other book. And there's a couple big things about Fizbans Treasury of Dragons. One, Fizbane is from the Dragonlance series, which this particular book is more of it's more of a supplement, where Witchlight is going to be an adventure. This is going to be something along the lines of Mordecai's Tomb of Foes, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, it's Volo's Guide to Monsters, that sort of thing, where it's not so much like an adventure. It's, hey, here's a bunch of really cool dragons and stat blocks. Here's some backgrounds. Here's some player options. Here's some stuff for DMs, and here's some extra DM tools for dragons. It's a little bit of everything for D&D that's about dragons. And the couple things that it really is introducing is, first and foremost, is it's introducing gem dragons. And we're not exactly sure what the gem dragons are really. We don't know a whole lot about them yet. We know that they're kind of I had the theory that they might be kind of where the chromatic are more chaotic and the metallic are more neutral, or more lawful. These are more in like kind of the neutral area and can go either way.
Mm.
But from the other things that we're hearing is literally they have tables to roll the personality of your dragons. If it's greedy, if it's lawful, if it's chaotic, if it's good, if it's evil. And literally these gem dragons can be anywhere in between, from what it sounds like. The second thing is that you're getting more options. With the gem dragons, you're now able to have gem dragonborn. So you can have the sapphire dragonborn, the jade dragonborn, the whatever type of them, and it adds to making it adds to them. And the other thing that they added with the gem dragons is there's some of them have what they're calling psionics, and the only real reference we really have to psionics from like past editions is really from like Mind Flayers, which is a very, very specific, oh yeah, these guys over here in the Astral Sea have this ability. And there was also a little thing touched on it about I think it was in 3.5 that had something with psionics that you were able to players were able to have some sort of psionic powers, but it was very very limited and kind of restrictive because it was very like it was almost a subclass of a subclass. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And these ancient gem dragons had it. In addition to in addition to that, the other thing that they've confirmed is that the Drake Warden Ranger, which I know you're excited about,
Yes.
and the Ascendant Dragon Monk are going to be new subclass options from this book. And there might be another one or two in there, but those are the two that they've confirmed. And I think that's going to be really, really interesting. The other thing that they've talked about that made me really excited was the Great Worms. And basically what players have been used to is you have wormlings are these little tiny dragons, then you have the young dragons, then you have the adult dragons, then you have the ancient dragons. These great worms are above ancient dragons. They're, from what they were talking about, they're going to be a CR 24 or higher. I mean, you're talking about these are going to be great great endworm bosses, big bad guys. They're going to be these giant things that have echoes in multiple worlds. So if you're doing a planescape, uh, you know, like a planescape sort of adventure, and this Great Worm is going to be on all of the worlds. They're going to be in all of the outer planes. They're going to be in the you know, the different material planes that you go to, and it's like that blows your mind a little bit. And they have this hive mind, so they'll all know you from that one interaction they had with you or that time you messed with it. And they the way they kind of talked about it was these great worms are on par with Bahamut and Tiamat in terms of being able to fight and destroy worlds and even like grant power. Like literally these great worms could be your patron as a warlock. That's the sort of power they wield. um or or a cleric or a paladin, or that's the sort of power they wield. And it's just, holy cow, they look like they're absolutely going to be awesome. And to not only run as a DM, but it looks like they're going to be like the new sort of end game that you can fight when you have a group of level 20s or level 15 or higher players. That really excites me. It's that I'm not saying that they're making a whole adventure for level 20 players, but they at least give you options if you get there, and they give you options that are looking really fun for both sides.
Mm-hmm. And then something else, like they said that we're getting a full dragon beastry. 20 dragon types are going to be fully explained. I mean, you brought up the three. You got the chromatic, the metallic. We've been announced the gem. Gonna assume that that other set would potentially be um these great worms, but could we see another set of like possible dragons in there that could turn into playable dragons? Because we can only account for what 15 types I think total that we actually know of.
I would honestly have to go look. But yeah,
And
I get what you're saying.
and then I'm assuming that the great worms are going to be basically the aspects of the dragon gods, because they talked a little bit about the aspect of the dragon gods. And then I had to throw the picture up. The picture's titled Turtle Great Worm, and just the scale of this thing. Like I want to fight a turtle great worm, because one, it's gonna somewhat pertain to what we're gonna talk about a little bit later in the show when we get into the rules section. But good God, that thing is massive, and it's an amazing looking creature.
Well, things like dragon turtles have always been like one of the staples of like nautical adventures. And to just make it bigger and badder just seems awesome.
Oh yeah. So our last bit of news here, we're just gonna kind of just real quick. Strixhaven Curriculum for Chaos, releasing November 16th, also releasing for $29.99. This is the Magic the Gathering crossover where you'll be role playing inside of the 5 schools of Magic from Magic the Gathering. I used to be a Magic player.
I was
Solid
too.
black deck. Like, give me my my demon deck that was completely illegal to play in tournaments. But this seems super interesting because I haven't played Magic in a long time, but being able to get in there and kind of role play as a potential planeswalker, like, just seems so freaking cool. Like, I want to see how this plays out. And this is also one of those ones where it seems like it would be more social RP with a little bit of combat, because what are you going to do? You're going to go through and fight the teachers? Like, how seeing how they play this storyline out is going to be interesting because it's in a school setting.
Yeah, I think the big thing though is that with with it being a Magic the Gathering setting, and I think they learned this with Ravinka, that it's one of those things that you're trying to. It's sort of a different Magic system. It's sort of a different uh it has different requirements. And I mean, you've played enough Magic that you know that okay, blue is the intellectual. They're the kind of wizards
Mm-hmm.
of that sort of world, whereas black is the necromancers, the liches, the people that are willing to sacrifice things for their own gain. And it's the different ideology of that. But one of the things I personally loved about Magic is that you always found those common grounds between the two. And whenever I started playing, I remember I never played the deck, but it was the Sakatog deck that it was black blue. If you played something on the table, it either killed it or it countered it every single time. And it did all that until it was able to play Psychotog and swing once and kill you. That was its whole stick. And I vividly remember playing that because it was a very it was I hated the deck because if you were playing any sort of Goblin Rush or any sort of like aggro deck, you felt like you all they did was kill everything, and it really really sucked. But on that same note, you were always it was always a big back and forth thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, with it being set in a school, I don't know how they're going to mix and match it, how they're going to make it work. But I'm sure they're going to find a way, and it'll be interesting. Um, and we haven't gotten all the information of Strixhaven yet. We don't know if it's just a setting or if it's an adventure or what yet, have we?
Not that I know of. I'm not 100% sure.
I know there's supposed to be a live stream today, and I haven't had time to watch it.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things that we'll probably give you an update next week, after we've had time to look at things and review it and know a little bit more about it. But it's one of those things that was a lot of fun, and it looks like it's going to be very interesting when we get more information about it. And it's like we're going to share it with you guys.
Yep. Now the big part. We're doing a top 3 this week, but we're each doing our own top 3. We're talking cleric subclasses here. So, let me just clear out this bit of news here and we'll get into this. Top 3 cleric style. So, Joe, why don't you start us off with your first cleric subclass that you ranked here?
Well, I, I all three of these, in my opinion, are really really good. Um, the first up is the Tempest Domain. It's very very. It has great great spells. It's got great channeled divinities. It is that weird sort of I have attack spells, I have crowd control, I have a little bit of everything. It's it is what I consider really the all rounder for cleric. And even though I think my next cleric might be a Tempest cleric whenever I get to play a cleric again. That being said, number 2 on my list is the Order Domain cleric, and I'm currently playing one, and I absolutely love him. It the channeled divinities, the voice of authority, um, the ability to make my enchantment spells a bonus action are all ridiculous. And the Order Domain is this weird thing of they're almost full support. And the cool thing about being a full support character is like I really don't get the kills or the damage, and I'm keeping everybody else healed and buffed and all this. But the other thing that I'm kind of doing is I end up being the kind of battlefield general, if you will. And the voice of authority is so good, especially if you have any sort of ranger or melee fighter, fighter, paladin, barbarian, or rogue. Oh God, rogue! Like you're able, if you are able to buff anybody, and they're able to make an extra weapon attack with their reaction. If you get a rogue that makes an extra weapon attack with their action or with their reaction, they get sneak attack on that.
That's a lot of
It is
damage.
absolutely ridiculous. And I know the rogues tend to use up their reaction with uncanny dodge and whatever. They have a couple other things they always end up doing. But it's one of those things that if you tell a rogue, well, you can either uncanny dodge the next attack that is made on you, or get a second sneak attack with your reaction. What do you think they're going to do?
Oh, they're going to take the damage.
Absolutely. And because of that, I have found that the Order Domain is really, really good. Now, the last but not least is the top in my book is the Grave Domain Cleric. Being able to cancel natural 20s, being able to do full heals when someone is unconscious. They are maybe not the best healer in the game, because I think that might ultimately go to the Light Cleric as pure numbers wise. But the Grave Cleric, I've lost count of how many times I've seen a Grave Cleric see someone get knocked unconscious, and they're like, all right, well, I'm gonna do third level cure wounds, take 30 points of healing, and they're like, and they go, wait, what? Take 24 points of healing, 30 points of healing, depending on what level spell they do, and they're like, wait, what? Yeah, you're unconscious, so you have you get all of the max healing on it, and then being able to just cancel a natural 20, like whenever a crit, whenever an enemy crits on somebody, it always hurts.
Oh.
Whenever you're able to use your reaction and be like, no, that is so freaking good. But those are my top three. So why don't you tell me about yours?
So, I have never, let me preface it. I've never even looked at the cleric class because I typically don't play that style of character in most games that I play. I've never really looked at them. So when we decided to do this top three, I went through and I read all of the domains. And my three are solely flavor based and what I feel I would enjoy playing the most. So I'm going to start off here with the death domain, because this is in my book, this is the anti-cleric. This is, I am the hand of death. You see a cleric walking up and you think you're safe, and I walk up and I pull the life out of you. And apparently that's kind of how this plays with Channel Divinity Touch of Death. You slap a melee hit, and then you get to add 5+ twice the cleric level to the melee hit. So cleric just dishing out massive damage here. Their Reaper ability is super cool. Any necromancy cantrips that target one can now target two. Later on, you can target, I believe, like 3 or 4. Just so much, like Animate Dead, Vampiric Touch, Blindness, Deafness. Like, you are just walking death and disease. And that's kind of more the style of stuff that I like play when I'm playing some games. So thought that the death domain was super cool. And then we get into my number 2, which is Forge Domain. And going through this, I'm like, when I think of a cleric, I'm like thinking robes, like frail little guy or girl like coming up and taking care of the sick and the injured, and then you got a Forge Domain walking around in heavy like plate armor, like swinging a giant sword or whatever it might be, because they're getting the ability to buff either the AC or the 2 hit and damage with their Blessing of the Forge, and I believe they also get a spell that does it also. Yeah, magic weapon. Soul of the Forge, resistance to fire, added AC. So like, this is a cleric that's basically a tank. Like they get to add fire damage to their melee attacks. I thought the whole premise of, again, this is kind of the opposite of what you would think a normal cleric would be. Like, this is borderline paladin when in my mind when I'm thinking about it. So I thought Forge Domain was super cool. But my number one, and there's a very specific reason for this number one, and that is the Trickery Domain. And I just finished Loki this week. All 6 episodes are done. I'm making a Loki. Like, Trickery Domain is 100% top to bottom. This is Loki. Everything about it. You've got Invoke Duplicity. I can literally make a copy of myself and cast spells from it and make the NPC not know which one is which. Which, if me and my Duplicity are close to the target, they roll disadvantage on their attacks against me because they can't figure out who's who. Brilliant. Cloak of Shadows. I can just disappear. Poof, I'm gone. Adding poison damage to my attacks. But then I'm looking at their spells, and this is where I fully got the Loki vibe. Like, Charm Person, Disguise Self, Mirror Image, Pass Without Trace, Blink, Dispel Magic, Dimension Door, Polymorph, Dominate Person, Modify Memory. This is literally Loki. And I loved the show, everything about it. I love the ending. I don't care what anybody says. It was a brilliant ending. Um, but like, having a cleric that I could literally just be a healer of mischief and just play it as somebody who disappears and goes over and knocks stuff off of a table to scare someone. I want to play a Trickery Domain because it would be fun. It would just be a blast to play.
I know you haven't listened to Critical Role yet. I mean, I know you're working on Exandria Unlimited right now, right?
Yep, working on Exandria Unlimited.
In in the Mighty Nine, this is the funny little comparison to what we're talking about clerics. Um, Jester in the Mighty Nine is a Trickery Domain cleric,
Okay.
and he just gets into hijinks. He gets into all kinds of trouble, all kinds of mismanaged situations, and absolute chaos ensues.
That's what I
And
like.
what you want to say, you say Loki vibes, and I'm immediately just picturing Jester going, "Hi, I'm Jester. You want to be my friend? Let's go steal some stuff." Like that's the first thing. That's the first thing that just pops into my head. And to actually counter that, the other thing that I'm talking about is the Grave Domain. Oddly enough, that's Caduceus, and you don't meet him right away. He's introduced a little later in the show, but Caduceus is a Grave Domain cleric, and it was one of those funny things that I'm not saying Jester's a bad healer. He just doesn't like to heal. He
Makes
wants to
sense.
be. He want like her whole and the Laura Bailey even said when she made her, her whole idea was to make a healer that doesn't like to heal, and it she played it up at points, but there were and the other players gave her the solid jabs into, oh, you don't like the heal, that's why Caduceus is the healer. But it was just one of those things that I totally understand. If we're looking at this, you're looking at it more from a role play aspect of, these would be my top 3 things to role play, and I'm kind of looking at it as, I just love these abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing that always drives me nuts, because when I first started playing my cleric that I'm currently playing, I had him as a war domain cleric, and I didn't really like it because partly because it was like the war domain, they wanted you to like all your channeled divinities were things like, okay, you get an extra attack with your bonus action, you get this other little thing, you get guided strike, and I found myself, because I had a fairly low strength, I only had like a 13 strength. I I didn't really use my Warhammer that much. And I ended up talking with my DM, and she told me, I gave her this whole idea of, I stuck with the same god, which is Bane, and he's all about, he's lawful evil. He's all about being a little bit of a tyrant, and if all else, if you don't go my way, it's going to be war, and I'll bash your skull in. And but the other thing is, he's all about order. He's all about making sure there's rules, making sure everyone follows those rules, or dire consequences otherwise.
Yep.
So it was one of those things that the transition felt very natural. I had a great little scene where I left my Warhammer behind and basically said, committed to my God. I'm like, look, I want to serve you, but I'm not serving you by being your enforcer. I need to serve you by being someone defining order in a different way. And that was my whole transition to the order domain cleric, and I've never looked back. I've absolutely loved it. And every single fight we've been in, I've used my channel divinities, I've used my voice of authority, I've used all of my tools that I got from my order domain. And if I had stayed a war cleric, I would have hated it.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the things, like what I was trying to do with that character and what I was actually doing with that character, were 2 totally different things, and it felt really weird, let me put it that way. And I loved transitioning to that. And a lot of these things, it's more about role play. It's more about seeing what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we're through clerics, we're good on clerics, right?
Good on clerics.
All right. Let's get to the backstory. It was my turn to write the backstory this week. And my original idea for this character was, I wanted to make a sorcerer that didn't cast Fireball. That was my whole inspiration for this character. And my first thought is, well, why would someone never cast Fireball? It's the most powerful spell in D&D. It's that thing everyone knows about. Well, what if they came from underwater? And I ended up making a Triton Storm sorcerer that I named Xander. He left his underwater home to learn more about the world above the seas. And it's the funny thing, because I made this little quirk with him, that he's fascinated by fire. If he sees fire magic, he has to watch it. If he sees a roaring campfire, he'll just stare into the flames, because it's so interesting and
alien to him almost.
Yes, exactly. And all of his magic focuses on lightning, thunder, ice, all of those elements of the storm. And initially, I had him be like, I thought, oh, he'll be this noble prince that was would come up to the surface and start exploring. And I'm like, yeah, that's a little too gaudy. And I ended up making him a knight of the. I always say Atlantis because that always seems to be the staple underwater city.
Yep.
But I made him a knight of Atlantis that ultimately is his thing was that he was going to the surface to find more powerful magic in order to protect his home under the ocean. And it was always one of those things that it made sense. It felt very natural that I have to go beyond what we know to find greater things. And I love Tritons, and they're stuff that are really hard to work into some home brews or certain aspects of like Forgotten Realms, for instance. But they're always really interesting. They're always that quirky sort of person because they like you said, they feel a little alien because they're like these, I don't want to say fish people, but they're these weird amphibious creatures. They're out of place the same way like turtles are out of place a lot of times because they're just so different from standard humans.
Makes sense, yeah.
But it's one of those things that I toyed around with him, and I really like the idea of him coming out, being able to cast a lot, being able to use his sorcery points to twin stuff, and really use this as he's going to be a damage dealer. He's going to be doing a lot of powerful spells that are interesting and really just having fun with it. But the other thing about the Triton stores being Triton and underwater, that kind of curtails into the rules corner that we were getting into, and it was rules for underwater fighting, movement, and everything you deal with when you're underwater. And I know there's one of the first things you have to worry about is how are you going to breathe underwater?
Yep.
There's a whole set of rules for drowning and all that, but for the most part, clerics get water breathing, or it's clerics, druids, and warlocks, I think, are able to get water breathing. I think one of those is wrong, but several different classes are able to cast water breathing. There's several magic items that allow you to breathe underwater. That usually isn't, if you know you're going to be underwater, you can usually prepare for it, whether it's potions, whether it's magic items, or just having a spell that takes care of it. The funny thing is once you're underwater, that's when there's a lot of interesting things that happen with the rules. First and foremost, in any sort of fighting, the melee attacks are made at disadvantage. And it's not like it's one of those things. If you think about swinging a greatsword through underwater, there's going to be a lot of resistance there, and as long as you don't have a swim speed, you basically can't fight as effectively underwater.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the idea behind it is if you're something like a Triton or a Storm Barbarian, I think gets a swim speed.
Yep.
Do turtles have swim speeds?
I
feel like turtles should have swim speeds, but I'm not 100% certain on that. But the thing is that while they're going through doing that, your movement is also like you're flying essentially, because you're able to move in all three directions. You can move side to side, front to back, and up and down. So there's the idea of I can attack from above, I can attack from the side, I can attack from beneath. All these sort of things are in play. The other thing that is weird, I'll just say, is that fire damage underwater, everything is resistant to fire damage underwater. That doesn't mean you can't cast fire spells. So if you cast a firebolt, for instance, technically you can still cast it, but everything has fire resistance, and it's one of those things that thinking about having fire magic underwater always has been weird. And I can totally understand DMs that rule that, yeah, you try to cast Firebolt and it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So take that with a grain of salt. The other thing I will say that is interesting is there's a couple of caveats with ranged weapons. Any sort of bow or crossbow can only fire to their first range. So a longbow, I think, is 120, 300. If you shoot past that 120 range, it misses.
Oh, so it's not even disadvantage; it just straight misses.
No, you just miss.
Oh wow!
And that's really weird, especially with any sort of daggers or like the shorter ranged weapons, like javelins, daggers, and stuff like that, where you only have like a range of like 20 feet, or even crossbows. I think they're like 60 feet and something else. So if you're aiming past that 6 feet, it doesn't matter if you have sharpshooter. If that goes beyond that, it doesn't hit the target. It just floats. It sinks. It doesn't get there. And like I said, it's a weird set of rules. There's also a weird set of rules with like I said, if you're fighting underwater and you have certain like a great sword or a great axe or a long sword, those are going to be at disadvantage. But if you have, I think it's either a spear, a spear, triton, or trident, a spear, trident, or harpoon.
Yeah, I saw javelin in the little bit of that I was watching. I don't know if that falls in the spear. Or...
Yeah, I think it would fall into that category. The idea is that rather than trying to make a large swing of some sort, you're making a direct stabbing motion, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And because you're making a stabbing motion instead of like a wide swing, because the water resistance is why the wide swing is at disadvantage. But if you have a stabbing motion, it gets around it. Now that said, I've heard DMs rule differently on daggers, because if you have a dagger and you're stabbing them, do you get disadvantage? Do you not get disadvantage? I feel like that's one of those ones where it could go either way, and that's kind of a DM discretion. But it's one of those things that whenever you're introducing your players to underwater combat for the first time, you want to go over this with them. You want to be sure they understand what's at disadvantage, what isn't at disadvantage, how the movement works. How it's nice to almost have like a tutorial for them the first time you do it. That way, whenever you get into a bigger fight, it's not as big of a thing.
Yeah, there's no surprises in the middle of the fight of what you can and can't do at that point.
Right. Yeah, and then last up we have is the encounter.
Yeah, this was just a real simple one. I came up with this one. Farm outside of the town that you're in has noticed livestock coming up missing on evenings. They have contracted adventurers to come and figure out what is plaguing their farm. Uh, First up, let's take care of yours. You went the pretty standard fare here.
I'll admit I felt a little lazy, but it's one of those things that I picked a monster that is it's kind of hard to run whenever you're a DM because trolls are one of those things that whenever you talked about eating livestock, they meat uh meat meat all that things that they come in and eat livestock, they take it away, and they're a menace to the community because they go and do that, and after they do that, it's one of those things that they're okay. We now have to go out and fight this, and because of its regeneration, because of its different abilities, it makes the monster really interesting and really uh, hard to fight, especially at low levels, and especially if you don't know that you have to hit it with either fire or acid to make it stay down. Um, but what did you think of when you made your encounter?
So I kind of went the almost the same kind of thought. I went with a werewolf. Uh a werewolf who has actually integrated into a pack of wolves. So you've got a singular werewolf and four wolves, two dire wolves, and again, it's one of those things where when you come up and you see a pack of wolves nomming on a a cow or something and you go up and you initiate, you're like, okay, cool, this is going to be easy. We're going to take out these wolves. And then one of them stands up on its hind legs and goes half human, half wolf. And now you're stuck fighting six wolves and a werewolf. And unless your characters know that a werewolf is resistant to all damage unless it is by magical means or a silver tipped weapon, they're going to have a little bit more of a difficult time dealing with the werewolf than the standard wolves, making it just a little bit more difficult in that encounter. And the surprise factor of, that wolf standing up and turning into a half human might get a couple little good RP moments out of them also.
Absolutely.
But I think that is it for this week's episode. As always, head over to twitch.tv/dragonheadspod. Audio feeds are slowly starting to come up. Still not on iTunes. I haven't gotten that email yet, but you can find us on most of the major ones. We're on Spotify. I think Google Play came through. Got a couple of them out there now.
Nice.
Other than that, you can find the show over on Twitter, DragonHeads2. Email the show, dragonheads216@gmail.com. Questions, comments, concerns. If you want to give us a scenario, you want to shoot us an idea for a backstory or an encounter, you can do that over there or on the Twitter. Follow the show over at twitch.tv/dragonheadspod. We record live Thursdays at 9 p.m. That may be changing here very soon. We might have a pretty big announcement coming up. Our intro music is A Self-Induced Psychosis by my buddy, Mr. Kyle Wynn. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We do appreciate it. Get out there and slay some dragons.
Good luck, adventurers.